Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Vinitaly International Academy, announcing the 24th of our Italian Wine Ambassador courses to be held in London, Austria, and Hong Kong from the 27th to the 29th of July. Are you up for the challenge of this demanding course? Do you want to be the next Italian Wine Ambassador? Learn more and apply now at vinitalyinternational.com.
Thanks for tuning in to Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Steve Raye, your host, and this podcast features interviews with the people actually making a difference in the Italian wine market in America, their experiences, challenges, and personal stories. And I'll be adding a practical focus to the conversation based on my 30 years in the business. So if you're interested in not just learning how, but also how else, then this pod is for you. Hi, this is Steve Raye, and welcome to this week's edition of Get U.S. Market Ready with Italian Wine People on the Italian Wine Podcast. This week, my guest is Valentina Abbona, who is the president of Marchesi di Barolo. We met at the Wine to Wine think tank event that Stevie Kim and her team held in Verona in October. And I was really impressed, not only with her and the things she had to say, but also the way she carried herself. It was very noble. And I think we're going to hear a little bit about that nobility in a moment. So, Valentina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. It's very exciting to be here.
And as an American, we're kind of like, we love the concept of lords and ladies and dukes and earls and all, and don't know the relative level of Marchesi. But could you tell us a story of how that name came about and the history of the estate itself?
Well, I don't want to, get appropriate of a name, which is not mine. But the winery is called the Marchesi di Barolo because it was the original estate of the Marcheses of the town of Barolo. So this noble family that was reigning over the village and the region of Barolo back in the 1800s. The line ended with Carlo Tancredi Falletti and Juliette Colbert, a French noblewoman that arrived in Barolo because of love, and my family bought it later in 1929. So we started making wine following the example of the Marcheses when they were still alive, and then the fourth generation in our family bought the estate. So my family is among the historical producers in the town of Barolo, but we are not noble.
Well, thank you all for listening to this.
And how to say nobility and temper, which you mentioned, comes from the heritage of the winery, and breathing this air and living here allowed me to be so.
Okay, my apologies on that. Wait, actually, the concept, the reason why I even mentioned that was the concept of noble varietals. You know, the world kind of has these international varietals like Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, Sangiovese, and so forth. But Nebbiolo, the grape of Barolo, was never really part of or considered that. It's got this incredible history dating back to Thomas Jefferson, and you can fill us in on that. But it's only recently not only come into its own, but become one of the noble wines, noble varieties for sure in the world. So can you take us back? You know, understand how your family got involved in it, but kind of the history of the estate and the history of Barolo as a region, the types of wine that they produced, and where Nebbiolo and Barolo fit in today's world.
Well, today surely there is more awareness about Nebbiolo and about the wines made from this noble grape. But it wasn't like this in the past. In fact, when you mentioned Jefferson, who in the 1700s used to visit the region of Piedmont, which was not in Italy yet because Italy was not unified as a country at the time. That happened only more than 100 years later. He used to describe the wine made out of Nebbiolo, sparkling as a champagne, austere as a Bordeaux, and sweet as a Madeira. So three characteristics more than elements, which are very much in contrast one with the other. I can't even imagine of a wine like that made today. And this was the result of a non-completed fermentation of the wine that was made in the region. Because, of course, here in the north, temperatures get quite cool in wintertime. So our guess is that with the arrival of winter, fermentation stopped without ending because the temperature became too low to allow fermentation, and then restarted again after bottling in springtime. So probably the result was this juice that Jefferson used to enjoy, and which he was very curious about. In fact, he asked to send some bottles when he went back to United States, bottles which never made it to the America, because during the transportation they exploded. And here is our proof of the non-stability of the wine and this fermentation, which restarted eventually with a rise of temperatures. Things changed only in the 1800s, thanks to Juliette Colbert, a French noblewoman. She was noble for real. She was part of the family of Colbert, the finance minister of the king's son. And Juliette fell in love with Carlo Tancredi Falletti, the last Marquis of Barolo, who was at that time in the last years of the 1700s and beginning of the 1800s, the ciambellano di corte, so the assistant to Napoleon. And in one of the events at the royal court, Juliette met Carlo Tancredi, and after getting married, she followed him in Barolo, this place who was to her completely, it was a total surprise to her. When she arrived in Barolo, she was in fact fascinated about how rural it still was. There were no paved roads, and even though the castle, which is still here today, was their home, the situation was not the same that she was used to in France. Yet the wine which they used to make in the region made her very curious, and she did all of what she could in order to improve it and to make a real wine out of this grape, Nebbiolo, which was locally from the area. She introduced for the first time barrels which, by the way, we still use today at the winery, and they date back to the 1800s, but still work perfectly for their original purpose, allowing the wine to finish the fermentation and finally become still dry and so preserve that austerity which always distinguished wines made out of Nebbiolo grapes. And Juliette had the intuition of making, for the first time, excavating underground cellars so that the temperature down was more stable compared to the open air where they used to make wine prior to her arrival. And in this way, she was able to make a wine which became the symbol of this region and of our lands. Wine that she named Barolo, after the town where she moved with her husband and in which she used to live. And this wine became so iconic for the region that even the king of Savoy, who was living in Turin, of course, that was the capital of the region and the city which later became the first capital of Italy, as the Savoy family became the first um, kingdom of Italy, was so curious about this wine that asked for some of it at Juliette, and she sent 325 barrels, one per each day of the year for the king, unless the 40 days of Lent, because she was very Catholic, so only counted the drinking days for the king. But since then, Barolo is known not just as the king of wine, but also the wine for kings.
And the name Nebbiolo, this familiar word in a lot of Romance languages relating to mist. How did you get that name?
Well, mist in Italian is nebbia. So surely there is a connection. And this is due to the fact that Nebbiolo is the latest grape to be picked. So it used to be picked with the first fogs. And also because there is the skin of Nebbiolo is never clear. There is a sort of waxy bloom on it, which can make it somehow foggy. In Italian, we say that the grape itself is nebulosa. So Nebbiolo with the both nebbia between the hills and the nebbia on top of it justifies the name of the grape.
Much like Brunello is little brown one and ergo the name.
Yes, something like that.
But the wine it produces is something unique. And I had an experience with it that I imagine is shared with everyone who's ever had Barolo, which is the first time you taste it. You go, wow, never tasted anything like that. Now, it was a long time ago for me, but I do remember the experience. And now Nebbiolo, the grape, Barolo, the wine, and all of the famous producers, your company included, are considered at the top of the stack, if you will, of world wines and are collected and all that kind of stuff. How does that compare and contrast with wines that people can drink every day? What kind of production do you have and who's drinking it and how accessible are the wines, both in terms of being able to purchase and also appreciate? A lot of questions, I realize that. But
A lot of questions, but they're all interesting questions because I think that today we are living a special moment for what concerns important wines and noble wines. First of all, there is, as we were saying, more awareness. So people have the opportunity of understanding better both the varietal and the wines made out of this varietal. A varietal Nebbiolo which is very sensitive to the place in which it is grown. Let's talk about terroir, because terroir is what makes every Nebbiolo wine special. In fact, we can't even speak about one Barolo, but we speak about Barolo in general as a region. It has so many different shades just in this little corner of the world. If we move just a few kilometers and we go in Barbaresco or in Roero, we would have different expression of the same grape, which are even called, the wine made of the same grape is even called in a different way. So, of course, these are the elements that impact on the expression that the wine has, and that makes it more or less accessible in terms of importance and austerity and also preferences. So on sandier soil, I would say that Nebbiolo shows more freshness, more accessibility, while on more compact and stony ones in places maybe where there is a more austere terroir, then we would have more closed, long lasting, and severe vertical expressions of it. So the accessibility of the wine itself depends on the terroir, so on where and when, so the vintage in which the grapes are picked, so the vintage of the harvest. And of course, this is very personal. It changes from person to person. But the more we study about these wines, the more we taste them, the more we have the opportunity of drinking them, then the more we will become familiar with them and they will become more accessible.
fair enough.
In terms of quantity, however, Barolo is a very tiny area. There are just around 2,000 hectares on the vine, which translates into 14 million bottles for the whole world in 1 year, more or less. So, of course, it is a rare wine to be found. There is not so many. The production is so tiny that, of course, it's not super accessible in this sense. But in terms of, besides the quantity, I would say that we can find occasions in which Barolo can be enjoyed more than what it was used before. Today we have the opportunity of addressing this austerity, which is typical of the grape, so the tannins and acidity, which we were mentioning earlier, and address it in a way that we can make wine which are understandable and pleasant already in their first years of youth. So just as any wine, I think that the evolution that we have and the opportunities that we have today, both in terms of vineyard management and winemaking, allow us to have wines which are more accessible, even in the first years of youth, compared to how it was before. So the opportunities of enjoying Barolo, of enjoying, generally speaking, Nebbiolo made wines are definitely greater today than before because of the greater experience, because of the greater knowledge, and because of the also of the different recipes which we can make today, which earlier were not even known, or people were just more locally eating. So we can have more occasions for our important and noble wines nowadays.
Thank you for listening to Italian Wine Podcast. We know there are many of you listening out there, so we just want to interrupt for a small ask. Italian Wine Podcast is in the running for an award, the Best Podcast Listening Platform, through the Podcast Awards, the People's Choice. Listener nominations is from July 1st to the 31st, and we would really appreciate your vote. We are hoping our listeners will come through for us, so if you have a second and could do this small thing for us, just head to ItalianWinePodcast.com from July 1st to the 31st and click the link. We thank you, and back to the show.
So 2 points on that. One, difficult grape to work with, very sensitive to its location. That makes it similar in some contexts to Pinot Noir, and yet we've seen a dramatic growth and almost shift of Pinot Noir production, big in Oregon and Washington in the United States. Who would have ever thought that? I mean, I've traveled to those states back when they were just growing wheat in those fields in the rolling hills, and now there's vineyards in the middle of them making really great wine. Why is Nebbiolo not grown anywhere else?
Well, we do have expressions of Nebbiolo, of course, from Piedmont, not just from Barolo, but generally speaking, also from the north of Piemonte. So Gemme, Gattinara, Lessona, Bramaterra, these are all the expressions of Nebbiolo from the north of Piedmont. We have some in Lombardy, in Valtellina specifically, but the clone is already different and it's called the Chiavenasca. So the local expression of Nebbiolo there is different from the one that we have here. We can find a little bit in Valle d'Aosta and also in Sardinia. Not many people know this. In Sardinia, there is some Nebbiolo on the Colli dell'Imbara. And my guess is that probably this grape used to travel with the king of Savoy, who was the king of both Piedmont and Sardinia. So he brought with him some. Outside of Italy, little Nebbiolos grown in Mexico. I had some Nebbiolo from Australia, also from California, actually. I should say, however, that the expressions are so particular and so different from the ones that we're used to here in the south of Piedmont because of the terroir of all these different places. In Mexico, for example, the expression of Nebbiolo tends to be very salty because of the roots going down close to the sea, to the ocean. So because of this peculiarity of Nebbiolo being so sensitive to the terroir, is more difficult to find it grown in other places rather than the one in which it became very famous.
Okay, so you're not at risk of dealing with issues like the people from Prosecco did, and having to change the varietal name and it being grown in a lot of different areas and made in a way that is repeatable, Charmat Pol. So let's get into the business side of the issue. By nature, then, because of not just the price, but the limited production, Barolo in general and your wines, I believe, are very on-premise oriented, have been. Now we're living in a world of COVID, which has completely decimated the on-premise business, bars and restaurants. How have you guys reacted to it? And your importer is Frederick Wildman, I believe?
Yes.
How are you guys dealing with COVID? Well, are you?
We still are. Yes. Very much right. We thought we were at the end of this, but it doesn't seem like that. Luckily, however, even though business, of course, on-premise business has suffered a lot, I think that the reasons behind the success that we still had in the past months is there are many, many reasons. First of all, I should say the curiosity of wine lovers and connoisseurs, which finally had more time of studying about it. And they were as anyone. We were all stuck at home, so we could only follow our passions in order to forget what the craziness that was outside. And for sure, for many people, this translated into greater studies about wines. I personally carried out a lot of virtual tastings and this long distance seminars in which we were discovering the peculiarities of Nebbiolo from the different areas, having different single vineyard Barolo in front of us from the same vintage, maybe even from the same town. So to really discover what terroir means and how many expressions we can find from such a small area. So this extra time that we had at disposal could translate into this greater knowledge, which today allow us to have even a greater public compared to before.
Well, that's great, but that's a reach. Yeah, the joke in the industry is, I get asked this all the time. I'm sure you do too. What's the best bottle of wine? And the answer is the one I just sold. Okay, we're in a commercial world where money has to be transferred, and if people aren't drinking it there, it becomes a challenge. A lot of the bigger players are doing well because they've shifted towards lower priced wines necessarily, or more mass market oriented wines. But when you've got a limited production of a high end wine, that's got to be a challenge. One of the areas I see, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but just kind of to move this along, is a shift in the where and how people buy wines. So while on-premise might be down, we're seeing e-commerce grow so dramatically. And all of a sudden, it's less of an issue of what's on the shelf than what it is you want or what you're looking for. So we think about e-commerce as the infinite aisle, if you will, the multitude.
And this is exactly the point that I was touching before. So people are more aware today, so they're more cautious about what they want to drink. And even though I agree with you that generally speaking, because of the difficult moment that we are all facing, wines which are cheaper should be growing more, we experience exactly the opposite. So we've been seeing a greater performance of our single vineyard Barolo rather than the everyday Barbera and Dolcetto.
Well, every day. For you guys, every day Barbera and Dolcetto, well, maybe. Well, I used to work for the company that imported Chiretto wines, and I learned everything I know about Barolo from Philip de Bellardino. You probably knew him. He was a mentor of mine. He passed away a few years ago, but he would tell stories and use Italian so that we understood what like Bricco Rocche meant and so forth, and where it was on the hillsides and so forth. And one of the wines that I discovered that I fell in love with that is really hard to sell in the U.S., we're finding, is Arnese. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And it's more Langhe, right? That's kind of the region where it's grown.
Well, Arnese actually find its home in Roero, which is just on the other side of the Tanaro River. So this major region of the south of Piedmont is divided in Langhe and Roero from the Tanaro. On one side, red wines are made mostly on which is Langhe, so the region in which Barolo and Barbaresco are located. On the other side, so in the north west of the river, in Roero is where specifically white varietal and Arnese, even more specifically, are grown. If we can divide a little bit in two, we can say in Roero for sure Arnese, in the Langhe mostly Nebbiolo and Barbera. Even though there are great expressions of Nebbiolo in Roero as well, I would say that what identifies the most Roero is surely Arnese. Arnese, which is also difficult to pronounce, so I understand that this can be how can I say, one of the reasons why it is not so of appeal.
It's not as hard as Gruner Veltliner.
As I mentioned, I always mention everything to Piedmont. So it's, among all of our grapes, for sure, Arnese is a little bit complicated. But this is is the DNA of the grape. Arnese in our dialect means little rascal because it was one of the most challenging varietals to be grown. In fact, Arnese, until 40 years ago or so, was just grown in order to, attract birds and animals, insects to bite on that grape and allow the other grapes to be grown. But then it became the icon of the region of Roero. So it's an important white wine made of an important white varietal, which has a very thick skin, which allows a sort of creaminess into the wine. So even though usually is a non-oaked white wine, it stands out for its complexity. So probably is the unexpected white wine. And this can be the reason why it's not so.
That could be a bad thing. Yeah.
I mean, you have to pay a little bit of attention before appreciating Arneise.
One of my favorite restaurants is Eat Truly in New York. It was around the corner from my office there on 26th Street. I think it's 26th Street. And they have a great rabbit dish there. I forget what they call it, but that with
Arneise, perfect.
is spectacular. But normally I would think of, getting a Barolo Barbaresco or something from the north. So it's an interesting one. Okay, so there's a new generation running the winery, you and your brother. You've been a very visible part of it. What is the future of the winery? Where are you guys going? And what are some of the new projects that you're working on that we can look forward to enjoying here in the United States?
Well, it's very exciting to have my brother on board. Davide joined officially the winery last year, and he's in charge of all the vineyard management, even though unofficially he's been working with us since ever. Both my brother and I, since we were little, used to help mom and dad with everything that we could do, even because we were forced by our parents to assist them. So we had really no choice. But the reality is that we both enjoy a lot what we're doing. We have two very different personalities and therefore approaches to the business. Davide, as I mentioned, is the head behind things. He's the hands and all of the heart in the vineyards and in the cellar, while I take mostly care of sales and communication, marketing. So we're very complementary in this. Of course, mom and dad are still a very important presence at the winery. And altogether, I would say that we make a good team. And this is another nice aspect, if I can say, of COVID, which allowed us to be together than what we used to. As before, we were always gone. And the ideas and the enthusiasm for the years to come is even more now. We bought a little estate in Barbaresco, which is Davide's jewel. Yeah. And he will show us all of the potential of Rio Sordo. Rio Sordo is one of the most famous vineyards and appellation within the Barbaresco area. And the idea is for him to test and show himself through that wine specifically, while continuing, of course, to maintain and preserve all the history and the tradition at Marchesi di Barolo.
So one of the other, you also produce, we mentioned earlier, Barbera and Dolcetto, I believe, right? How important is that in your export business? I love the wines, but boy, it's really hard to find. But Barbera is an everyday drinking wine is wonderful. I know you do it in Italy, but nobody does it here. Why?
Our data says that our Barbera does quite well in the United States. So this
I was wrong. That's good to hear.
It's different for anyone, I believe. But I would say that because of the accessibility of the grape, Barbera, but also of Dolcetto grape, these are wines that you can enjoy on a more daily basis. Also, the fact that are produced in larger quantities compared to Nebbiolo allows greater accessibility. In fact, Barbera is the most widely grown grape here in Piedmont. Despite the fact Nebbiolo is more famous, surely Barbera is produced in larger quantities. And Barbera too can be quite sensitive to the terroir in which it's grown. So mainly we have three expressions of it. The most dear to one, as it is the most local production for us, is Barbera d'Alba. And specifically our Barbera d'Alba Rouveil, it is made with a little blend of Nebbiolo, which probably makes it a little bit more austere and a little bit closer to our Nebbiolo wines. So it's probably because of this personality of the wine itself is more easy to be enjoyed in different situations. It makes it very versatile.
So what kind of activity do you guys have planned for the U.S.? Are you going to be traveling to the U.S.? I know we're recording this at kind of the beginning of January when things are looking pretty bleak. Hopefully we will pass this crest by the time we come back. Are you planning on coming to the U.S.? Will you be participating in promotions here and so?
I hope so. I really hope so, because I used to travel to United States at least every other month. until 2020, of course, and I'm missing coming to the different states of United States now. My plan for next month, so end of February, is to be in Miami for the SOBI. We have very nice program there with a little vertical also. Let's hope that will take place, and let's hope to see each other overseas in different parts of the states.
I take that the same way in Italy. One last point, a question I would ask. You went to Wine to Wine. Tell me what you think about that event. How much of you participated in the past? I don't remember meeting you at earlier ones, but it doesn't mean you weren't there. What do you think about as an event, and how valuable it is to you as a producer?
Well, I always thought that Wine to Wine was one of the most interesting events and activities in the wine industry in Italy, because it always gave the opportunity of meeting people who are on your same page, from which you can learn a lot from. So the way it is, it has always been programmed with lectures before in presence, now virtual or half and half as it was this year, has always been really interesting and stimulating. And also the fact that I feel like we are all at the same level somehow. So there is very short distance between who is giving lecture and who is listening.
Oh, I get that 100%. It's like being in college again. It's like you're all in one place together and all at the same level, hungry to learn, but having something to contribute there.
To learn, everyone. And there is so much enthusiasm. And I miss when we were there in presence, because it was even more like being, as you said, in college during the break. And it was just beautiful. And it's very enriching.
We're coming to the end of our time here. I'm going to surprise you with a question that I end all my interviews with. Is there a big takeaway from the conversation that you've had? Is there something that most of the people who are listening to the show are in the U.S. trade, also some in the UK? It's not Italian producers, it's Americans. So distributors, importers, salespeople, and whoever else is out there listening, send me an email. Let me know who you are. It'd be great to hear from you. steve@bevologyinc.com. But in any case, thinking about big takeaways, is there anything that we've talked about that you think is particularly useful or helpful for anyone who might be listening to this broadcast that they can put to use immediately in terms of in the business of international wine?
Well, I think that just, every time we listen to other people living the same situation in which we all are, and making our confrontation with someone else in the business is always, is always a great lesson for each one of us. And I think that the positivity with which we faced all this COVID situation can be a good lesson. As I mentioned, my way to get out of this was to do virtual tastings and to meet constantly, of course, virtually, with many people. But I think that the greatest lesson for all of us, and for me too, is that the power of wine, the enthusiasm that is behind wine, really allow us to travel constantly. We can be physically in one place, but with our imagination and thanks to a glass of wine, we can be anywhere we want in the world. And this enthusiasm will never let us down. So I'm sure that with a great glass of wine, we can face every situation. And I really hope to be able to cheer in person soon with most of the people who are listening to us today.
Okay, so to put that into American commercial speak, drink all you want, we'll make more.
I like that.
I stole that from an old cereal, Lay's potato chip commercial. Anyway, this is Steve Raye. Thank you all for listening to the Italian Wine Podcast today. Get U.S. market ready with Italian wine people. Thank you to Valentina for sharing her time with me today. It was great to meet you in Italy, and I hope we'll have the chance to meet again soon, like at Vin Italy coming up, and that the world will, if not return to normal, that we'll be able to recommence all of the things we do that make a career in the wine industry so valuable. So thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian Wine Podcast, brought to you by Vinitaly Academy, home of the gold standard of Italian wine education. Do you want to be the next ambassador? Apply online at vinitalyinternational.com for courses in London, Austria, and Hong Kong, the 27th to the 29th of July. Remember to subscribe and like Italian Wine Podcast and catch us on SoundCloud, Spotify, and wherever you get your pods. You can also find our entire back catalog of episodes at ItalianWinePodcast.com.
Hi guys, I'm Joy Livingston and I am the producer of the Italian Wine Podcast. Thank you for listening. We are the only wine podcast that has been doing a daily show since the pandemic began. This is a labor of love and we are committed to bringing you free content every day. Of course, this takes time and effort, not to mention the cost of equipment, production, and editing. We would be grateful for your donations, suggestions, requests, and ideas. For more information on how to get in touch, go to ItalianWinePodcast.com.